Hey peeps! So today we are going to dig deep into the Hellbound Heart by Clive Barker. This is a novella, super short. This was published in 1986. I love Clive Barker. I love his stories. This is not the only book by him that I'm going to deep dive into. So, what do I mean by deep dive? I mean we're going to go chapter by chapter, and I'm going to let you know all the goodness, gory detail stuff that happens in this book. Why? Because I want to. Because I like it. I want to talk about the book. And honestly, I feel like there's people who don't want to read, but they want to know what happens, you know? And I'm that person. I will read it. Well, if I want to read it. I'm not doing things where I don't want to read it. If I want to read it and you want to know about it, then yeah, I'll read it. I'll let you know all the details, all the things, because I just think there's people like that who want to be in the know without actually putting in the work to know, you know? All right. So, without this book, Hellraiser wouldn't be a thing. That's why I also want to go through this book, because the adaptation is very similar. There's one minor thing, not minor, it's actually kind of in my head, it's a big deal. There's one big difference between the two, and we're not really going to get into that. I mean, maybe I'll bring it up depending on how I'm feeling as I go through this, but very, very similar to Hellraiser. So if you haven't seen Hellraiser and you have stumbled upon my channel and want to hear me blab, and this sounds good, watch the movie. It's really great. Like the greatest. Do you want to say the greatest adaptation? Yes, as far as accuracy goes, like as far as following the book goes. Clive Barker wrote this, also directed Hellraiser. So I love Clive Barker. I love him so much. Anyways, let's get started. So we are following Frank. Oh, by the way, I don't like any of these characters. Like, there's like 4 main characters. I hate all of them. Love this book. But if I sound snarky, it's because I am. Because these characters, Also, I'm sick. So I know, like, my nasalness is coming out and I can hear it. And I'm sorry for that. So I don't usually sound like this. So I hope you can bear with me. So Frank, he likes pleasure. I mean, don't we all to some extent, right? So he loves pleasure and he feels like he has experienced all the pleasure life can give him. And he is looking for pleasure that he's never experienced before. He wants to experience the top, like, the top of the top as far as pleasure goes. Something that he can't achieve on his own. Okay. So this is how he stumbles upon the puzzle box. This is the name of this puzzle box. I can't pronounce it, so I'm just going to refer to it as the puzzle box. So he stumbles upon this puzzle box, and he has a buddy named Kircher who says, if you open this puzzle box, these Cenobites will come out. And if you give them some things that will appease them, the likelihood of them granting your wish is more likely. What's his wish? Pleasure. Simple enough, right? So this dude, Frank, sets up a shrine for these Cenobites. I'm going to read a little bit of that for you right here. He had worked ceaselessly in the preceding week to prepare the room for them. The bare boards had been meticulously scrubbed and strewn with petals. Upon the west wall, he had set up a kind of altar to them, decorated with the kind of placatory. Why do I feel like that's wrong? Placatory, whatever. Offerings, Kircher had assured him, would nurture their good offices. Bones, bonbons, needles. A jug of his urine, the product of 7 days' collection, stood on the left of the altar, should they require some spontaneous gesture of self-defilement. On the right, a plate of dove heads, which Kircher had also advised him to have on hand. Yeah, I mean, we can take from this that the Cenobites are some kind of monster, right? Like, they're never called monsters, they're just called Cenobites, but like, they're like monsters, okay? So Frank he's got a shrine of nasty things, and he's sitting there trying to solve the puzzle box. And it takes him like hours upon hours. And I don't think he's a smart cookie. I mean, maybe he is, but there's something that happens later in the book which makes me think he's not very smart, and more so in the movie. Anyways, so he spends all this time before he's able to solve the puzzle box. And once he does, there's music that starts playing in the puzzle box and bells start ringing. These bells are kind of a sign that the Cenobites are coming. So it's like, yay, you solved the puzzle box, ding ding. Now we're gonna meet you, kind of thing. So Frank had he didn't put any image in his head of what a Cenobite could possibly look like. So when he finally comes face to face with a quartet of Cenobites, he's like, oh shit, right? So it says, why then was he so distressed to set eyes upon them? Was it the scars that covered every inch of their bodies? The flesh, cosmetically punctured and sliced and infibulated, then dusted down with ash? Was it the smell of vanilla they brought with them, the sweetness of which did little to disguise the stench beneath? Or was it that as the light grew and he scanned them more closely, he saw nothing of joy or even humanity in their maimed faces, only desperation and an appetite that made his bowels ache to be voided? So we can glean from that that they're terrifying. And if you've watched Hellraiser, then we all know Pinhead. He's not referred in here as Pinhead, but the description of him is in this book. There's not a lot of explanation of what they look like, but I believe that what we see in Hellraiser is a true description of what they're supposed to look like, because again, Clive Barker also directed the movie, and again, phenomenal job of making the book and the movie identical. So there's a lot of red flags. What the Cenobites are saying, a lot of stuff they're saying is a little sketchy, a little worrisome. Might want to back up from asking them any questions, keep your favors for another kind of genie. So when Frank's like, hey, because the Cenobites are like, well, what'd you like? He's like, I'd like pleasure, please. So this starts with the Cenobite saying, we understand to its breadth and depth the nature of your frenzy. It is utterly familiar to us. Frank grunted. So, he said, you know what I've dreamed about. You can supply the pleasure. The thing's face broke open, its lips curling back, a baboon's smile. Not as you understand it, came the reply. Frank made to interrupt, but the creature raised a silencing hand. There are conditions of the nerve endings, it said, the like of which your imagination, however fevered, could not hope to evoke. Yes? Oh, yes. Oh, most certainly. Your most treasured depravity is a child's play, besides the experiences we offer. Again, that's a big red flag. Okay, I don't want to mess with that. What about my nerve endings? What do you mean? Don't mess with my nerve endings. So after that, Frank starts to feel things, sensations. He can hear the walls, the paper, the plaster. He can hear every, the people talking in the buildings next door, bugs skittering across the floor. He can hear every little thing. He can feel the hairs growing on his body, okay? It's intense. He hears everything, and he's feeling things. And he's not just feeling things, he's feeling emotions that he's had, memories and the emotions that came with it. So he gets to a point where his memories are a harem of girls that apparently he's had in the past, and he starts to get aroused. Yeah, he's feeling a little frisky with all these memories and these but it's also overwhelming too, all the touchy and the feely things he's experiencing when he's just standing there. It's overwhelming. So he thinks, well, I might as well take care of one problem. So he does. He takes care of himself, and in taking care of himself, he just goes on to the floorboards and just leaves it there, right? And then soon after, before he thinks he's going to reach madness, all of the feelings stop. He doesn't feel anything, see anything, hear anything, smell anything. He thinks he's dead. His eyes are closed, right? So when he opens his eyes, the fifth Cenobite, which was missing, is sitting on a pile of rotting heads in front of him. So that's cool, right? He had made a mistake opening the puzzle box, a very terrible mistake. "Oh, so you've finished dreaming," said the Cenobite, perusing him as he lay panting on the bare boards. "Good." She stood up. The tongues fell to the floor like a rain of slugs. "Now we can begin," she said. That was chapter 1. I don't know about you, but when I first read this book, I was hooked. I was so on board for this. And I mean, that was just 20 pages, 19 pages. Like, that was amazing. I mean, I thought that was amazing. Did you like that? Okay, we're gonna keep going though. All right, so chapter 2. This is where we meet Julia and Rory. Rory is Frank's brother. Okay, we'll get into it. Okay, so there's Julia and Rory, and they show up at Rory's late grandmother's house, which was the house that Frank was in upstairs, in the room where he put a spunk on the bare floors, which we don't see, but we know it's there. Okay. Anywho, so the house is kind of a dump, but Rory's like, "We're going to fix it up. We're going to live here. It's going to be great." And Julia's like, "Well, what about your brother? Like, what if he wants the house?" And Rory's like, "No, Frank doesn't care. Frank's not going to want this house. Even if he does, I'll just buy him out. It's fine. This place is ours." So Julia agrees, and they start moving in. So on moving day, we meet Kirsty, the fourth person I absolutely hate in this entire story. Kirsty, I don't know if she's a coworker of Rory's, but they are friends, like BFFs, which I have thoughts. But anyways, so Kirsty is in love with Rory, like infatuated. Okay, he doesn't see it. I'm not sure if Julia sees it, but Julia doesn't like her. Like, she thinks that Kirsty is dumb as rocks. And I mean, when I read this book, I can't necessarily disagree. And we'll see some of that throughout this. But Julia is like, so Rory's like a dull dud, okay? Like, there's nothing about him that is like, he's just plain. He's just there. He's a little bit of a wuss, right? And then Julia, her whole personality is I'm pretty. What is she like? I have no idea. What is she into? Well, cheating on her husband, that comes up. Spoiler. This whole thing's a spoiler. But Julia literally has no personality except that she's pretty. And then even Rory says she's really pretty. And Kirsty is like, I don't think he really loves her. It's just that he loves that she's so pretty. It's weird. So that's Julia's personality. And then like Kirsty, she ain't got much going on, and she's not smart. She does not do smart things. To cement my point about Julia and Kirsty's relationship, here's a little tidbit here. Julia always looked at her so strangely, as if faintly baffled by the fact that she hadn't been smothered at birth. No matter, Rory had asked her to come, hadn't he? And that was invitation enough. She would not have turned down the chance of his smile for 100 Julias. Girl, you're a little unhinged, right? And then, so Kirsty's helping them with their moving day. She's stuck at the house with Julia while Rory is off getting like furniture and stuff. And then he finally like comes in, and he immediately has a little tiff with Julia about something, or rather. And then this is like Kirsty's thought still, like we're still in her thoughts. And she goes, "He grinned at her, parading the ragged line of his front teeth that she had first found so irresistible." His crooked teeth? That is what you found so irresistible? Oh, girl. Kirsty, in the movie, she's Rory's daughter. Ew, I don't like it. Like, there's nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong that Rory has a daughter, and then like Julia's like the stepmom, right? But that's not how it is in the book. Like, Kirsty's just like infatuated with him, and they're friends. So I can guess I can see why they made the switch, like for the story as a whole to make sense, but it comes off so icky to me because I know that's not how it was in the book, and it's like, oh, I don't like it. I don't like it because like the love is there still, but it's a different kind of love, you know. Ugh, I just don't like it. Anywho, let's get back into the book. So after all the furniture is moved in, Julia goes upstairs to find a room that will be the master bedroom. And the obvious choice for the master bedroom is the room that Frank was in. So she goes in there. She gets a really uneasy feeling. It's a little like mildewy and drafty in that room. So it's kind of gross anyways. So she's like, I don't like this room. So she shuts it, locks the door, and leaves it behind. At least for that moment. Now we're on to chapter 3. Now this is where we kind of get a glimpse of Rory and Frank more as people, like their personalities, I guess. Rory and Frank were 18 months apart, so they were really close. So in their childhood, they were basically inseparable, like, you know, as close as brothers can be, right? But once they kind of went into their adolescent years, they really started to drift apart. Frank was kind of like the black sheep of the family. You know, he was always the one doing things to shock his parents, just to shock them, and, you know, doing crazy stunts and getting into trouble and blah, blah. You know what I'm saying? The bad boy sheep, black sheep of the family, you know what I'm saying? And then Rory was your vanilla wafer, okay? I don't know how else to explain him. That's what he's supposed to be. So when Julia and Rory got together, she's never met Frank, so all she could go off of was Rory's stories about them when they were children. And it really piqued Julia's interest. I don't know if it was like the bad boy angle or what, but she like was really curious about this guy. And then the first time she met Frank, and Kirsty for that matter, the first time they both met him was a week before Julia and Rory's wedding. So when Julia and Kirsty met Frank, Kirsty hated him on sight, and Julia was feeling him. Like I said, she was curious about him just from the stories Rory was telling her, and I don't know, I guess seeing the guy in the flesh really tipped the scales over, you know what I'm saying? A strange time ensued. As the days crept toward the date of the wedding, she found herself thinking less and less of her husband-to-be and more of his brother. They were not wholly dissimilar. A certain lilt in their voices and their easy manner marked them as siblings. But to Rory's qualities, Frank brought something his brother would never have, a beautiful desperation. Perhaps what had happened next had been inevitable. And no matter how hard she'd fought her instincts, she would only have postponed the consummation of their feelings for each other. At least, that was how she tried to excuse herself later. When all the self-recrimination was done with, she still treasured the memory of their first and last encounter. Kirsty had been at the house, hadn't she, on some matrimonial business when Frank had arrived. But by the telepathy that comes with the desire and fades with it, Julia had known that today was the day. She'd left Kirsty to her list making or such like and taken Frank upstairs on the pretext of showing him the wedding dress. That was how she remembered it, that he'd asked to see the dress, and she'd put the veil on, laughing to think of herself in white, and then he'd been at her shoulder, lifting the veil, and she laughed on, laughed and laughed, as though to test the strength of his purpose. He had not been cooled by her mirth, however, nor had he wasted time with the niceties of a seduction. The smooth exterior gave way to cruder stuff almost immediately. Their coupling had had in every regard but the matter of her acquiescence all the aggression and the joylessness of rape. So as Julia and Rory are settling into their new home, you know, and they're fixing it up, they got to fix things up because this house is kind of falling apart. Julia starts to become drawn to the room that made her super uneasy, but she almost felt like she had to do it in secret. So she'd like unlock the door, sit in there listlessly doing nothing but staring at the wall, and then she'd leave. But she didn't like doing it when Rory was around. She wasn't sure why she went up, nor how to account for the odd assortment of feelings that beset her while there. But there was something about the dark interior that gave her comfort. It was a womb of sorts, a dead woman's womb. Sometimes, when Rory was at work, she'd simply took herself up the stairs and sat in the stillness, thinking of nothing, or at least nothing she could put words to. Very odd choice of words, Barker. A empty woman's womb. Okay. Oh, and then I also like highlighted this quote or this sentence because like how I said that she didn't Rory didn't really love her, just how she looked. And then the sentence says she didn't love him no more than he, beneath his infatuation with her face, loved her. So there's things like that throughout the story that makes me say the things I say about this, okay? Rory hurts himself. He's fixing something downstairs and he hurts himself, right? So he yells, hell and damnation. She heard but did nothing. Too late, she surfaced through a stupor of she's like in the room, just being in the room. Too late, she surfaced through a stupor of melancholy to realize that he was coming upstairs. Fumbling for the key, an excuse to justify her presence in the room, she stood up, but he was already at the door, crossing the threshold, rushing towards her. His right hand clamped ineptly around his left. Blood was coming in abundance. It welled up between his fingers and dribbled down his arm, dripping from his elbow, adding stain to stain on the bare boards. What have you done? She asked. What does it look like? He said through gritted teeth. Cut myself. We found out he's a big wuss, so I made it sound even wussier because he's a wuss. So Julia drives him to the hospital and he gets a couple of stitches. And then when they're back at the house, she like looks in the room and there's no blood on the floor. So she's like, hey, did you clean up the blood in the room? And he goes, no. He's like, you must have done it. He's like, oh, look. And she's like, no. And then he's like, oh, you're such a good housewife. You're so good that you don't even realize you clean up after me. Not in those words, but whatever. I don't like him. I don't like her, but I don't like him either. I don't like these characters, which is odd because I do love the story, but it's maybe because none of them have a happy ending. Chapter 4. Now that the perfect, happy, unproblematic couple feel like they've really settled in, they throw a housewarming party. And who's there? BFF Kirsty is there, and some like other people that I don't even think like one person has like a last name, I believe, but like we don't get to know those people. Like they're just there, okay? So Julia's kind of like over it. She's like, I don't really like these people anymore. Like, I don't care to be friends with them. You know what? It's like midnight. I'm going to call it a night. You guys have fun. You keep playing charades or what. I don't know what they're doing, but it's just a dinner. And like Rory's telling stories. They're all laughing. So she's like, have a good night. I'm going to go to bed. So she heads upstairs, right? And instead of going straight to bed, she again is drawn to that room. So she goes into that room. So the walls are like starting to shift in front of her, and she's not like a 100% sure what she's seeing, but it looks like something substantial is just starting to form in the dark too. She's not like, this room isn't like lit up. Like it's the lights are off, right? It was human, she saw, or had been, but the body had been ripped apart and sewn together again with most of its pieces either missing or twisted and blackened as if in a furnace. There was an eye gleaming at her and the ladder of a spine, the vertebrae stripped of muscle, a few unrecognizable fragments of anatomy. That was it. That such a thing might live beggared reason. What little flesh it owned was hopelessly corrupted, yet live it did. Its eye, despite the rot it was rooted in, scanned her every inch up and down. And she didn't fear this thing before her, which I'm like, do you not have any self-preservation at all? You saw that thing, was like, cool, you're here, I'm here. So in her unscaring, just staring at this thing, it says her name. All it said before the wall began to close on it again and its wreckage was once more eclipsed by brick and plaster was Julia, then simply, it's Frank. And at the very end of the word, blood. So Julia puts two and two together, right? And she's like, oh my God, Frank is in the wall. Oh my God, I don't know what happened to him, but he needs blood. So he needs people. I mean, I love him, right? Like, we could really be something. I will do anything for him, right? Like, girl, you got a husband, a perfectly fine vanilla wafer husband downstairs, entertaining guests. And you want to be with Frank, who's literally stuck in your wall right now? Choices, people. Gotta make better choices. The thought took sleep away, took sanity and sorrow with it. She had been in love all this time, she realized, in mourning for him. If it took blood to restore him to her, then blood she would supply and not think twice of the consequences. So, thinking that Frank will be hers with all this, she's in a better mood. She's just nicer, friendlier, happier, right? Which in turn, Rory's happier. He's like, yeah, my wife is like in this great mood, which puts me in a great mood, which makes me feel all these things, and I'm remotivated to restore this house. There's a day, and he gets a little frisky with her because it's his wife, and they're having a good time, and they're in good moods. And Julia's like, I don't want to do this, but he wants sexy time, so she goes and has sexy time. And while in the act, she closes her eyes and she imagines it's Frank. Because that's cool. That's classy gal this Julia is. So she's closing her eyes and she almost calls out the wrong name while she's doing this with her husband, Rory. So she decides to keep her eyes open because she can't let that slip out. And she's just going to sit there and plan how to get Frank a body while her husband is just completely in the now, in the act. He's there. That's all he's thinking about while she's laying there. I'm assuming just like a rag doll thinking, how am I going to get a body for Frank? Girl, choices. Make better choices. All right, peeps. Now we're in chapter 5. We're like almost halfway through the book. Almost. So it's because there's like only 11 chapters. I'm going off of chapters. But so in chapter 5, if you still thought Frank was okay, or if I didn't say anything that was like super unflattering about him, I have another piece of text I'd like to read you. So, in other circumstances, he might have snatched her from under her would-be husband's nose, but fraternal politics counseled otherwise. In a week or two, he would have tired of her and been left not only with a woman whose body was already an eyesore to him, but also a vengeful brother on his heels. It hadn't been worth the hassle. That's what Frank thought. Like, I'll have sex with her. That's great. But that's as far as I'm going to go. I'll still let her marry my brother. Because who wants to deal with that hassle, right? Stand up, guy. Let me tell you. So we find out why Frank's life had become lackluster. He starts getting depressed. He starts seeking out the pleasure, more than normal. Like he's really trying to find... I want to say he was trying to find himself, but he's not trying to find himself. He's just trying to find things to make him feel good. So this is how he came upon the puzzle box. It kind of goes into it a little bit in more depth. So where did Frank go, right? Because he appeared in the room, but he's not really in that world. But he's not in the wall. I mean, he's in the wall, but he's not really in the wall. You know what I'm saying? There's another world. He's in another world with the Cenobites, and they are giving him pleasure. Which I can only assume has something to do with his nerves. Because, like I said in the beginning, it's going to fuck up your nerve endings. I can't get past that. When I read that about the nerve endings, I was like, ooh, don't do that to me. But, he made his choice. He thought it was an easy choice. And then he was like, I made a mistake. And whatever. We are past that now. So we know he's with the Cenobites, right? So Frank's chilling, living with the Cenobites, if you want to put it that way. As it was, they had brought incalculable suffering. They had overdosed him on sensuality until his mind teetered on madness. Then they'd initiated him into experiences that his nerves still convulsed to recall. They had called it pleasure, and perhaps they meant it, perhaps not. It was impossible to know what these minds it was impossible to know with these minds. They were so hopelessly, flawlessly ambiguous. They recognized no principles of reward and punishment by which he could hope to win some respite from their tortures. Now, nor were they touched by any appeal for mercy. He tried that over the weeks and months that separated the solving on the box from today. There was no compassion to be had on this side of the schism. And I don't know if that's the right word. Schism? It's just schism. I'll put the word, I don't know. There was only the weeping and the laughter. Tears of joy, sometimes, for an hour without dread, a breath's length even, laughter coming just as paradoxically in the face of some new horror fashioned by the engineer for the provision of grief. The engineer is one of the Cenobites. It's like the last Cenobite who kind of takes you away, like the chick who was sitting on the rotting heads. She's called, and she's the only Cenobite with like a gender. But anyways, she's called the engineer. I don't really know why. I still don't know why. But I think that's just like, I'm a little slow on that part because I feel like it's obvious and I don't know it. I don't know what it is. I don't know what the obviousness is. You know what I'm saying? So how is it that Frank was able to put his body in that room again with Julia? Well, here we go. He had been lucky, Frank. Some prisoners had departed from the world without leaving sufficient signs of themselves from which, given an adequate collision of circumstances, their bodies might be remade. He had. Almost his last act, bar the shouting, had been to empty his testicles onto the floor. Dead sperm was a meager keepsake of his essential self, but enough. When dear brother Rory, sweet butterfingered Rory, had let his chisel slip, there was something of Frank to profit from the pain. He had found a fingerhold for himself and a glimpse of strength with which he might haul himself to safety. Now it was up to Julia. Sometimes, suffering in the wall, he thought she would desert him out of fear. Either that or she'd rationalize the visions she'd seen and decide she'd been dreaming. If so, he was lost. He lacked the energy to repeat the appearance. Chapter 6. Okay, now it's getting juicy here. So Julia, this is the day. She's going to get Frank a body, right? So she's like, I'm so pretty, because that's all we know about Julia. She's so pretty, right? So pretty Julia goes to a bar to lure some men to it, right? So she, of course, picks the like meek, sad man because she's got to be able to like handle him, you know what I'm saying? So she's got to be the meek, sad dude who thinks he's hit the jackpot 'cause she's so pretty. So she takes him home and they go upstairs and she goes to the room. And the thing that he says that all the other people, because there's more, say is like, oh, no bed. Yeah, there's no bed in here. I guess we're going to just do it on the floor, right? So she says that and she's like, oh, is that going to be a problem? Blah, blah, blah. So she undresses him, right? And then he kind of like starts undressing himself and he's like, oh, are you going to like undress too? So she like turns her back to him or like goes around. I don't know. Either way, he keeps undressing. And then she's like, wait a minute, I don't want to see him butt naked. So she grabs the knife out and she stabs him until she unalives him. So after that, she leaves because now she's got like blood on her. So she needs to like, so she goes in and like bathroom and like washes it off, as much as she can without taking a shower, which bitch just take a shower. But anyways, so she wipes the blood off her. And when she goes back into the room was like a furnace as the dead man's energies pulsed from his body. They didn't get far. Already, the blood on the floor was crawling away towards the wall where Frank was, the beads seeming to boil and evaporate as they came within range of the skirting boards. She watched entranced. But there was more. Something was happening to the corpse. It was being drained of every nutritious element. The body convulsing at its innards were sucked out, gases moaning in its bowels and throat, the skin desiccating in front of her startled eyes. At one point, the plastic teeth dropped back into the gullet. The gums withered around them, and in mere moments it was done. Anything the body might have usefully offered by way of nourishment had been taken. The husk that remained would not have sustained a family of fleas. She was impressed. Now, I mean, impressed? Sure. Terrified? Yes, definitely would have been terrified in that moment. But sure, we're fascinated and can't wait to see Frank in the flesh, right? But he doesn't respond to her. She tries talking to him after that, and he ain't responding. So as she's getting rid of this man's clothes, basically, and maybe some like bones and apparently a pair of dentures, Rory comes home. So she's able to quickly get the stuff taken care of before Rory realizes anything's amiss. And then she finally goes up to the room, and Frank tells her that he needs more. Like, he doesn't want her to see him in this freaky ass form. He needs more bodies. And she's like, whatever it takes, right? Chapter 7. So Rory calls his BFF Kirsty, and he's like, BFF, Julia's been acting really weird lately. Do you think you could go and talk to her and see what's going on? Mind you, Kirsty and Julia are not friends at all. They don't even like each other. So for Rory, dumbass that he is, saying, hey, best friend who's in love with Rory, can you go talk to my wife who you don't like, who doesn't like you, and have a girl-to-girl chat and see what is going on with her? Oh, and don't tell her I sent you. Because Kirsty cares. Because Kirsty cares about Julia. Like, what the frig is happening? Anywho, so she's like, sure, of course, anything for Rory. Because she loves Rory. I hate his name too, by the way. I don't like it. Anyways, so Kirsty shows up, because this is like back in the day too, so there's no cell phones. You can't just call. I mean, you could call, but she's not calling. She goes to the house unannounced, doesn't call first or anything, just shows up at the house, which I guess was normal back then, but whatever. So she shows up at the house while Julia is literally in the middle of murdering a man for Frank, of course, right? So she murders the man and lets Frank take over from there, and she goes and answers the door. And, oh, hey, Kirsty, what's up? And then Kirsty's like, oh, she looks flustered. She's got some color in her cheeks. She doesn't look gaunt or weird or anything like Rory said she would. She looks very full of life. And then she notices that there's like a jacket on the coat hanger that doesn't belong to Rory. And she's like, is Rory here? And she's like, oh, you just want to talk to Rory? And then she's like, no, I wanted to see how you're doing. She's like, it's not a good time, and slams the door in her face, which, I guess I would too. If we weren't friends and I didn't like that you were BFFs with my husband, because it's a little weird. I'm not saying it's not unheard of, but it's a little weird. Okay, I probably would have done the same thing. I'm not gonna lie, even though I don't like her. Probably would have done that. So after she gets the door slammed in her face, Kirsty, she decides to leave, which, good job, because you really should. And as she's leaving, she feels like she's being watched. In the damp room, Frank stared through the hole he had made in the blind. The visitor, whose face he vaguely recognized, was staring up at the house, at his very window indeed. Again, that's because Kirsty has met Frank. So it's not clicking with him yet. She just looks familiar, but that's how they know each other, right? Confident that she could see nothing of him, he stared back. He had certainly set his eyes on more voluptuous creatures, but something about her lack of glamour engaged him. Such women were, in his experience, often more entertaining company than beauties like Julia. They could be flattered or bullied into acts of the beauties would never countenance and be grateful for the attention. Perhaps she would come back, this woman. He hoped she would. So Frank's got a crush on Kirsty. So great. This is all coming together so beautifully. So after Kirsty's gone, Julia goes back up to the room, to the infamous room that is Frank's room, and she's like he looks more human, but he's still not quite right, and he's like, I need another body. And now Julia's like, okay, I'm sick of this. I want to give you another body. Well, this is fucking annoying as shit, right? And he's like, hey, we can be together, and we can go dancing. He doesn't say that. He says it later in the book to her though. And I'm like, what kind of, this is terrible manipulation. Like, and very little has to be promised to Julia to do this, but he like promises her dates and, you know, couple things. So she's like, okay, fine, I'll get you another body. Choices. Ugh, that's like the theme of this book. Choices. Better choices. Chapter 8. This is a weird one. So it's storming outside. Julia hates storms. Like, I don't know if it's the thunder that scares her. I don't know, but she doesn't like storms and they make her uncomfortable. And she's waiting for Rory to come home because he's at a work party and he always gets a little tipsy at work parties. She knows this. And, you know, when people get tipsy, they get a little frisky, right? So Rory comes home and they almost like fight immediately because he's like, why are you such a bitch? Like, why do you hate me? You know, and they have all this stuff. And then there's a thump upstairs. You know, it's Frank, right? But Rory's like, did you hear that? Like, what was that noise? And then she's like, oh, it was nothing. Like, you know, it's just a storm, blah, blah, blah. And then a bigger thump happens. And Rory's like, I freaking heard something. So he goes up there. Julia's trying to follow him, trying to get him not to open that damn door, right? His hand is on the door handle. He's about to open the door. And then Julia steps in front of him and goes, I'm scared. So he stops what he's doing, which, I mean, if I said I was scared, my husband just look at me and be like, about what? Like, what is your problem? But she says, I'm scared. And he goes, oh, poor baby. And like, he's drunk. So he's kind of like loopy too. But he's like, oh, poor baby, blah, 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 blah. So he starts like kissing on her and hugging her and comforting her. But again, he's drunk. So he starts getting a little frisky with her, right? And she's like, oh, God damn, not again, right? She really does not like having sexy time with her husband. I mean, with everything that we know, I mean, I guess, but anyways, so she lets him do things to her, you know, let him have the sexy time. And while this is happening, closing her eyes, she tried to picture better times, but the lightning spoiled her dreaming. As sound followed light, she opened her eyes again to see that the door of the damp room, Frank's room, had been opened 2 or 3 inches, and the narrow gap between door and frame, she could just make out a glistening figure watching them. She could not see Frank's eyes, but she felt them sharpened beyond pricking by envy and rage. Nor did she look away, but stared on at the shadows while Rory's moans increased. That feels icky to me. I read horror. I read dark romance. And there's just something really icky about this. I think it's because they're brothers. Maybe. Or the fact that Frank doesn't even like Julia. Like, even though she's like helping him and he's like, oh, we can be together. Like, he doesn't want to be together, you know? And it's icky. Like, is he envious? I just think it's just ickiness. I don't know. And then this next part is kind of weird. So after Rory finishes, he passes out. Like I said, he's drunk, so he just passes out right after that exciting time for them. And then Julia goes to Frank's room and she's like, what the hell? Like, he was so close to discovering you. What the hell are you doing? And in the room that Frank's in, there's blinds up and they're like nailed to the window, which I don't know why. But anyways, so he ripped the blinds down and that was like the thumping that Rory heard. And he said the reason he did it is because he wanted to watch the storm. And something about, like, he wanted to, like, experience, how does he put it? He glanced around at her briefly, but he wasn't seeing her. There was too much world to be reacquainted with tonight. So I guess this is the day or the night after that second body where he kind of gets more of his senses back. But I just thought that was a really weird thing to do. Like, I want to see the storm and re-see the world. It was weird. I don't really 100% understand it, but chapter 9. Kirsty, this little biatch, I really don't like her. Anywho, she decides to spy on Julia because she's like, I don't know if I should tell Rory that she's cheating. I don't really know. I need to make sure. I need hard evidence other than a jacket, right? So I think it was like, it wasn't as exciting as she hoped, or she wasn't planned or prepared. I don't know what her deal was. But anywho, it takes forever before Julia actually even leaves the house. She finally leaves. She comes back an hour later with a man. His name's Sykes, by the way. We learned that. So right there, I'd be like, okay, good. Like, there's my proof. She just walked into her house with this dude, right? Well, I don't know what Kirsty's looking for, but she needed more than that, she says. She waited in her hiding place for a further quarter of an hour, not certain of what to do next. Did she linger here until the man emerged and challenge him? Or did she go to the house and try to talk her way inside? Neither option was particularly attractive. She decided not to decide. Instead, she would get closer to the house and see what inspiration the moment brought. I cannot. That's what I mean. Like, she's not the sharpest tool in the tool shed. Meanwhile, inside, Julia is talking to Sykes, and, things are going to happen because he's the next victim. Okay, it's not a surprise here. But once in the house, things had begun to go awry. Halfway up the stairs, friend Sykes, and they're saying friend Sykes because he was like, oh, this is my job. Look at my children. Look at my wife. But like telling her, whatever. I think that just nerves. But anyways, so halfway up the stairs, Sykes has suddenly announced that what they were doing was wrong, that God saw them and knew their hearts and found them wanting. She'd done her best to calm him, but he was not to be won back from the Lord. Instead, he lost his temper and flailed out at her. He might have done worse in his righteous wrath, but for the voice that had called him from the landing. He stopped hitting her instantly and became so pale it was as if he believed God himself was doing the calling. Then Frank had appeared at the top of the stairs in all his glory. Sykes had loosed a cry and tried to run, but Julia was quick. She had her hand on him long enough for Frank to descend the few stairs and make a permanent arrest. So back to Kirsty. Kirsty's lurking. She thinks she hears a scream. So she's like, what should I do? Should I barge in? No, I'm going to be a creeper and break in through the back of the house. So she does. And then it's pretty quiet at this point. So she's like, maybe it was just a cry of passion and I mistook it, right? So she goes upstairs because she just has to know what's going on. And when she gets upstairs, Sykes sees her and tries to make a run for her, like to save him. Seeing Kirsty, he threw himself toward her, seeking what fragile protection she could offer. He had got no more than a pace from the door, however, when a form spilled into sight behind him. It, too, seemed diseased, its body bandaged from head to toe, the binding stained by issues of blood and pus. There was nothing in its speed, however, or the ferocity of its subsequent attack that suggested sickness. Quite the reverse. It reached for the fleeing man and took hold of him by the neck. Kirsty let out a cry as the captor drew its prey back into its embrace. So this is where she finally decides to run. And like an idiot, Frank, she doesn't know it's Frank yet, but Frank starts talking to her, so she stops because his voice sounded familiar. Listen, I don't care whose voice I would have heard. If I saw what I saw, I don't care if it was like the love of my life, or I don't know, some celebrity, which I don't feel like I like any celebrity particularly that much. Whatever. It doesn't matter. Whoever's voice I would have heard, even if I know, I'm not going there. What she saw, you keep going. You don't stop and have a chit chat. So obviously, because she's an idiot, Frank manages to grab a hold of her, and he brings her back into this infamous dank room of his, and he shuts the door. And we think he's going to kill her, right? No. He gets a little handsy because, again, remember, he's like lusting over Kirsty now. And at this point, or right before this point, she realizes that this is Frank. So it's not like she doesn't know who he is this whole time. Like, she eventually figures out who he is. Anywho, so when he tries to get handsy with her and they're in the room, he says, "Come to daddy," it said. In her 26 years, she had never heard an easier invitation to refuse. I like that line. I like that a lot. So Kirsty doesn't have a whole lot of backbone. So like, she does say no, but like, he grabs her and tries to do things, and she doesn't really do anything at first. Her very sanity was at stake here. She had no choice but to fight back, and quickly. Before Frank had a chance to press his suit any harder, her hands went up to his face, fingers gouging at his eye holes and mouth. The flesh beneath the bandage had the consistency of jelly. It came away in globs, and with it a wet heat. The beast shouted out, his grip on her relaxing. Seizing the moment, she threw herself out from under him, the momentum carrying her against the wall with enough force to badly wind her. Good for her. You go, girl. And now they're kind of like having a little scuffle here in this room because, like I said, he shut the door. So she sees the puzzle box on the floor. Like, she doesn't know it's a puzzle box, but she picks it up and she's going to chuck it at him, right? But he kind of goes like, whoa. So he stops and he's like, give me the puzzle box. And she's like, say please. And so he says please, and she's like no. And then she chucks it out the window, so it shatters the window. She throws it out there. He's roaring like, no, 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 no. And she she finally runs out of the house, like, okay, now you're gonna be smart. So she runs out of the house, and on her way out, that window was facing the front of the house. So as she runs out, the puzzle box is on the floor, so she grabs it, and then she keeps running. And then she keeps running, and then she like passes out. Like, I guess he like scratched up her arms, but there was no real, like, it didn't really say that. Chapter 10, Kirsty's in the hospital. So she passed out. Someone found her and decided to bring her to the hospital. So she's in the hospital room, and this dude's like, hey, we found this puzzle box with you. I don't think he calls it a puzzle box either. I don't think they know it's a puzzle box. Anyways. So he's like, because she's like lied, and she's like, oh, I don't really remember what happened, blah, blah, blah. So when they asked her questions, so they leave her with the puzzle box thinking maybe it'll help her jog her memories. And this is when I say maybe Frank's not smart, but I like Kirsty's not smart either. But like Kirsty figures out the puzzle pretty damn quick in comparison to Frank, who spent like hours, maybe days figuring it out. She was like, oh, let me just mess with this thing a little bit, and it opens up. Like she solved the puzzle box. So when she figures out the puzzle box, the bells start chiming. We all know what that means. The Cenobites are coming. She has no idea, by the way. So the Cenobites show up, and they say it's called the blah 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 configuration. Again, I don't know how to say that word. It's puzzle box to me. It said, pointing at the box. She looked down. The pieces were no longer in her hand, but floating inches above her palm. Miraculously, the box was reassembling itself without visible aid, the pieces sliding back together as the whole construction turned over and over. As it did so, she caught fresh glimpses of the polished interior and seemed to see ghosts' faces, twisted as if by grief or bad glass, howling back at her. Then all but one of the segments was sealed up, and the visitor was claiming her attention afresh. The box is a means to break the surface of the real, it said, a kind of invocation by which we Cenobites can be notified. Who? She said. You did it in ignorance, the visitor said. Am I right? Yes. It's happened before, came the reply, but there's no help for it. No way to seal the schism. That's the word. I don't know if that's the word. Schism. And we take until we take what's ours. This is a mistake, she said. Don't try to fight it. It's quite beyond your control. You have to accompany me. So she's like, whoa, like, let's hold on a minute. Okay. I didn't know what was going on here. You know what? Want to know who I got this box from? They were like, no. And they're just like, okay, well, I'm going to tell you anyways. It was Frank Cotton. Frank Cotton, ring a bell? And they were like, oh, yes, we know Frank. He solved the box too, am I right? He wanted pleasure until we gave it to him. Then he squirmed. If I took you to him, he's alive then. Very much alive. And you're proposing what? That I take him back instead of you? Yes. Yes. Why not? Yes. So the Cenobites decide to give Kirsty a chance to give them Frank. Because, Frank was clever. Frank got away. They don't like that. So they're like, okay, but like if you're tricking me or tricking us, we're going to take your soul. Biatch. Cenobites' parting words with Kirsty is, make him confess himself and maybe we won't tear your soul apart. So that brings us to chapter 11, which is our final chapter. So it starts off with Rory coming home, and he's hoping that his darling Julia will just come clean, just confess that she hasn't been the best lately. And that's it. That's all we get from that. She said she's got to show him something, and she leads him up to the infamous dank room that Frank has been in. And then it just cuts there because. So back to Kirsty. So now Kirsty's like, okay, I got to go to the house and I got to get Frank to give the Cenobites Frank. So she goes to the house again, knocks on the door again. Julia opens the door again. And she's like, hey, I want to see Rory. So she's like, okay, he's in the kitchen, but be gentle with him because he doesn't feel good. So Julia comes in. I mean, not Julia. Strike that. Kirsty comes into the house and she sees Rory sitting at the kitchen table with a drink. Like, he looks bad. Like, he looks like he was dragged through the mud. Turns out that Julia and Rory were able to destroy Frank. And he's dead now. And then Rory like tells Kirsty, like, I know everything. Like, we took care of it, okay? You don't have to say anything. We got this covered, right? And Kirsty starts panicking because she's like, Frank's dead? Like, what? Frank's gone. Like, he's gone. So now she's like internally losing her ever-loving mind because now she's like, great. Now the Cenobites have me. Like, I don't have anyone to give to. I don't have a person to give to them. So as she's internally freaking out, she says out loud, I don't believe it, she muttered. Take her upstairs, Rory said to Julia. Show her. Do you want to see? Julia inquired. Kirsty nodded and followed. It was warmer on the landing than below, and the air greasy and gray, like filthy dishwater. The door to Frank's room was ajar. The thing that lay on the bare boards in a tangle of torn bandaging still steamed. His neck was clearly broken, head set askew on his shoulders. He was devoid of skin from head to foot. Kirsty looked away, nauseated. Satisfied? Julia asked. Kirsty didn't reply, but left the room and stepped on the landing. At her shoulder, the air was restless. You lost, something said close by her. I know, she murmured. The bell tolling starts going off, which is like, again, we know what that means. The Cenobites are coming. Now, here's another thing I forgot to mention. In chapter 10, when she's in the hospital, a nurse comes in and it's like, honey, like, what are you doing out of bed? Get back into bed. And the Cenobite is there. And she's like, what the fuck? Like, this bitch doesn't see you or whatever. And the Cenobite's like, yeah, they can't see us or hear us. The only one who can deal with us are the ones who solve the puzzle. So while the bell toll is ringing in Julia and Rory's house, they don't hear it. Okay, just to make that clear. So she's the only one who can hear it. So she goes back downstairs to talk to Rory and Julia, and they say, like, it's good. We don't need your help. We got it taken care of. Thank you so much for helping me. Blah blah blah. And then Rory, quote, he says, it's all right, he said sweetly, still hoping to heal her. Really, it is. He opened his arms. Come to Daddy, he said. What? What? The phrase didn't sound right out of Rory's mouth. Kirsty put a hand out to the wall to steady herself. It wasn't Rory who was speaking to her. It was Frank. Somehow it was Frank. Dun dun dun. She doesn't understand. Like, she knows it's not Rory now because the disgusting comment, come to Daddy, right? So now she's freaking out and she's like, oh shit, like, you, and like, by the way, the bell stopped tolling. The Cenobites are totally watching this play out. So she's like, fuck you, fuck these Cenobites, like, pieces of shit, because they're watching it play out. They are entertained. So then she tries to get away because Frank comes at her with a knife. He like pulls a knife out and he's like, I'm Rory now, and no one's gonna know any different than that. So as he comes towards her with a knife, she starts backtracking to the front door, and the stairs, I'm assuming, are near the door because all of a sudden Julia is on the stairs and traps Kirsty from leaving the house. And then Frank goes to stab her, and she gets out of Julia's grip just in time, and he ends up stabbing Julia on accident, which, yikes. Anyways, Frank scarcely seemed to notice. His eyes were on Kirsty once again, and they shone with horrendous appetite. She had nowhere to go but up. The fireworks still exploding, because there's like fireworks too going off now. I don't know why, but anyways, the fireworks still exploding, the bells still ringing. She started to mount the stairs. Her tormentor was not coming in immediate pursuit, she saw. Julia's appeals for help had diverted him to where she lay, halfway between stairs and front door. He drew the knife from her side. She cried out in pain, and as if to assist her, he went down on his haunches beside her body. She raised her arm to him, looking for tenderness. In response, he cupped his hand beneath her head and drew her up toward him. As their faces came within inches of each other, Julia seemed to realize that Frank's intentions were far from honorable. She opened her mouth to scream, but he sealed her lips with his and began to feed. She kicked and scratched the air, all in vain. Wow, that took a turn. And mind you, Frank's basically looks like a person now. He looks like Rory, but he's a full person now. You know, he don't need her no more. So Kirsty runs up the stairs while he's feeding off of Julia, and she hides. They have like a junk room upstairs where all their extra stuff is while they're moving in. So she goes and hides in the junk room. Frank comes in, where are you? And he doesn't see her, so he closes the door. And then she gets the hiccups, because of course she gets hiccups. I mean, makes sense. Anyways, so she eventually leaves the junk room, and she's in the hallway, and she hiccups again. And then Frank's like, there you are, and grabs her. Again, he's still full of lust, okay? This guy doesn't know when to quit, okay? So she tries to get away from him, and of course, she gets backed up into that damn room. You know the room I'm talking about. Remember that heap that we're talking about with the no skin and still steaming? Yeah, that was Rory. So she trips over Rory's body, and Frank is coming in swinging because now he's pissed. Now he's just going to kill her, right? So he's swinging the knife in the dark. He can't see. She can't see. She just knows she tripped over the body. And he goes, there you are, said Frank. The knife slices were suddenly closer, inches from her head, but she was deaf to them. She had her arms about the body beneath her, and approaching death was nothing beside the pain she felt now touching him. Rory, she moaned, content that his name be on her lips when the cut came. That's right, said Frank. Rory. Somehow the theft of Rory's name was as unforgivable as stealing his skin, or so her grief told her. A skin was nothing. Pigs had skin. Snakes had skins. They were knitted of dead cells, shed and grown and shed again. But a name, that was a spell which summoned memories. She would not let Frank usurp it. Rory's dead, she said. The word stung her, and with the sting, the ghost of a thought. Hush, baby, he told her. Suppose the Cenobites were waiting for Frank to name himself. Hadn't the visitor in the hospital said something about Frank confessing? You're not Rory, she said. We know that, came the reply, but nobody else does. Who are you then? Poor baby, losing your mind, are you? Good thing, too. Who, though? It's safer that way. Who? Hush, baby, he said. He was stooping to her in the darkness, his face within inches of hers. Everything's going to be as right as rain. Yes? Yes. Frank's here, baby. Frank? That's right. I'm Frank. So saying, he delivered the killing blow, but she heard it coming in the darkness and dodged its benediction. A second later, the bell began again, and the bare bulb in the middle of the room flickered into life. Frank soon realizes, because that bell toll is going off, so now Frank is starting to hear it, and he's like, oh shit, and he finds out what she did. And, he calls her some very mean names. Not very nice things, okay? But the Cenobites take Frank, and they're like, now go. This doesn't concern you anymore, to Kirsty. And Kirsty's like, all right, you don't got to tell me twice, right? So she runs down the stairs. And then she hears Julia calling for her. She's like, help me, Kirsty, please. And Julia is laying on the ground with her wedding dress on and her head in her lap. I didn't get this part. I did not get it. So Julia says, "Help me, Kirsty," with her head unattached. And then her body starts floating. Julia's. And then the Cinnabite says, like, "I'm the engineer." And then Chrissy's like, "Fuck this." And she bolts out of the house. And it's like dawn, like it's a new day, while the terror and horror of what's going on in this house. So that was like that last, like the thing with Julia still weirds me out. But anyways, so she runs outside. She literally bumps into a stranger right as she like walks outside. And then she realizes that the stranger bumped into her, and now she has the puzzle box in her hand. And that's how it ends, with Kirsty, stuck with this damned puzzle box. And, you know, I loved this story. Okay. And I don't like the characters. So the way it ended, I'm fine. I'm fine with that ending. It was great. It's gory. There's like more like gory like talk in the book, but I didn't want to like, read all of it, because the whole point of me is to let you know what's up without you having to read it, and give you just the tidbits, which I thought I did pretty well, even though I've been rambling. But you know what? I enjoyed this. I had fun talking about this book, again, because I love the book and I just love all the things. So I hope you enjoyed listening. I mean, if you're still here, then of course, right? If you did stay this long, all the way to the end, this is the end, please put a black heart emoji so I know that you're the real MVP. All right. And I will see you guys next time. Bye, peeps.